Good morning, teachers. This is Heuristics for Teachers, meaning we speak in broad brushstroke terms about such things as the self vis-a-vis the context for the self. What is not the self? The environment, the rest of the universe. Bucky used to say, me plus environment equals universe. But what does me mean, right? In the Wittgenstein world, we don't close our eyes and introspect in response to that question as much as we investigate how people use the word me or I or any of those, right? Even studying Python for a while, you might get a new meaning for self out of that. And there's a curious mix here, I think you'll agree. You might say quirky, a curious, quirky mix of a kind of a mathematical, code based content mixed with the humanities, and that's because we have established a bridge. If you think back, the bridge is over the CP Snow Chasm, and the CP Snow Chasm, that was between the sciences and the humanities, roughly speaking. And it's a stated objective of synergetics to bridge that canyon, basically. And I'm saying that this is what it looks like when you bridge it. You get all kinds of, well, for example, I'm stashing all these scenarios, these so-called YouTubes on YouTube. And thanks to a huge amount of work going on, I have all this sort of coded ability, I have this ability to use a coding language, a logic, an executable logic against the database of Google's YouTubes to get back like all my YouTubes or all any channel's YouTubes, right? I can go up against I can use their API as it's called, which is their dashboard, their front end, the tools that Google gives you to look into the guts of YouTube. That's paralleled by all kinds of big companies, right? And my institutional wealth, measured in terms of my ability to access this data, use um, all these facilities, have the fancy cell phone. This is the kind of stuff that led Bucky to say things that sound kind of crazy to our ears, like, the world consists of 4 billion billionaires. That was a previous doubling, right? Or that we're all billionaires. What was he meaning by that? It's crazy. We can't. He's saying compared to kings of the past, we already have higher living standards than like King Henry VIII. And what does he mean? Well, like on average, we're actually probably more literate. You know, even on average, right? People didn't really know that much back then. So mentally, we were much more worldly. We're much more steeped in sort of science, you could say, but we also have all these artifacts that make life very different, right? I'm just this average person and I'm taking care of an older person and running a household, and it's all because of appliances. And I use Bonneville power to turn all these little wheels locally, right? Like the dryer and the washing machine and the dishwasher, right? Appliances. So you could say my wealth comes from all these appliances, all this automaticity that enhances my environment. And Fuller was like, yeah, you can be rich in the sense that you have all of Spaceship Earth. And the better it is, the wealthier you are. Like the more people on Spaceship Earth are not living in misery, the more wealthy we all are. Even the wealthy, right? So called. He's always making a difference between life support. Like if I told you you're going to have plenty to eat, plenty of shelter, all that going forward, health care, but you're not going to have that much money, right? Because it's like money is your freedom to just run out and buy a Ferrari or the fancy bottle of wine. And there are only so many fancy bottles of wine and so on. So you could have all kinds of high living standards and still you're probably not going to get the fancy bottle of wine. And if you do, it'll be a gift from somebody. It won't be that you had enough money to buy it. And that's where a lot of my fantasies trend is towards institutional wealth. Like in the military, you don't own that submarine you're on. You don't own that aircraft carrier or that jet fighter, but you feel like you do. You talk about it as mine sometimes. And really, you're the one getting the benefits, the fun of flying around the world in a jet fighter or aircraft carrier. In that case, you're not flying around the world. You're sort of plowing through the water and stuff like that. But you feel wealthy because your living standard is high in that sense. It's like when people go to World's Fairs and they just become optimistic because the species as a whole appears to be gaining in wealth as opposed to leaking it away, right? So a lot of what Fuller talked about when he talked about wealth related to, I would say, institutional wealth. And people are always accusing him of being either a communist or a capitalist or a socialist or whatever, right? People project on Bucky a lot, right? Because on the one hand, he's dressed like a banker and he's like best friends with a lot of business tycoons and stuff. He seems to talk about J.P. Morgan with admiration. And yet, he's writing this kind of subversive material with subversives like civil rights activists and talking about, real democracy. He's very Emersonian and very individualistic. And that's where I wanted to end up here with individualism. I found this very fun website where all the different philosophies are done as little balls. It's like list of ideology balls. And I was going to say egoism is something Trevor knows a lot about. Trevor of Synchronophile. He studied a few of these isms. Systematic ideology was kind of a fun one. It was about how the isms turn into each other in certain ways. Look at all these isms, right? So egoism is way down here. And I like to link egoism, even though I'm not an expert, but in terms of an area for research, how does egoism contrast and compare with individualism a la Emerson, right? Because Emerson also espouses a kind of individualism. He's saying we need, and it's characteristic, people always say what was characteristic of the American philosophy that was coming up from Emerson and others was that it featured individualism. And you really do get this in Bucky a lot. He's always talking about how it's the individual that makes a difference. It's the individual that's the unit of kind of experience. Our scenarios are anchored in ourselves and corporations, for example, although they hold all these patents. The corporations hold the patents, and yet they have no thoughts because they're not able to think. As a corporation, you're just an inanimate fictional construct in law books. You're just not, you're a fictional character as a corporation. You have no thoughts. Neither does London. London doesn't think. New York doesn't think. Journalism has a lot of shorthand, a lot of cliches. They'll say, America thinks this or Italy thinks that, but none of these things actually have that kind of agency. Only individuals think, was Bucky's philosophy. And so all good things really flow from the minds of individuals. So he was very much in the Transcendentalist tradition, which of course is what the last several videos have all been about. We're putting it together for you, kind of like we're putting together a puzzle for you as to what is American philosophy, and where might it be going. Good questions. We'll talk more about it.